Hello and welcome to another Pixel Game Maker tutorial. This video is going to be about everything bullets, so if you got any questions about bullets, hopefully it will be answered in here. We're going to go over some animation tips, setting up object tips, and then we're going to go into the runtime action, fire bullet, and then we're going to go into the bullet settings. We're going to see exactly what we have offered with the easy implementation of projectiles in Pixel Game Maker. And with that said, let's get started. Alright, so I'm in the animations tab, and here I'll just show you some real quick setup that is pretty useful with setting up bullets. I have a bullet animation, I have two motions, arrow with animation that kind of scales in and out, and then I have a bullet that's just static. Alright, so in both of them though, under the direction, I have this rotate and auto generate, and what that is going to do, and this is pretty important for bullets because most of your bullets are going to be like this, is whatever direction the sprite is, if you rotate and auto generate it, it's going to automatically generate the direction and it's going to rotate it depending on what way it's called. So if your player is facing left, with this option on, it's going to shoot it left and it's going to rotate it the exact degree that it needs. Alright, so by selecting this, it'll save you a lot of time in setting up some of these directions, especially useful for bullets. The thing to note is you'll see an option here called flip on y-axis, and that is because the editor or the engine it uses the auto generate based off this direction. So you want your bullet to be facing the downward direction, and then it's going to auto rotate it based off of that. So for instance, if I had this bullet facing the opposite way, just that I created or whatever, if I had it facing the opposite way, I'd have to click flip on y-axis, or else the bullet would be shooting backwards. So if you can't remember what it is, just remember as long as it's facing down, then the directions will be correct. All right. And so again, if it's facing sideways, say you get a sprite where the bullet's facing horizontal, you're going to have to rotate that and make it like this in order for the bullet to auto rotate correctly. Okay, and let's talk about some other things that we can do with bullets just to give a cool little effect like this as the bullet's traveling. This is called interpolation, what I'm using, and I'm using the linear version, meaning that it's a constant increase, where if you used curve, it would be like in a graph, it would be kind of like starting slow and then going fast kind of a thing. But linear is just all the same. And what I'm doing is I'm giving this frame, which is the normal scale, I'm giving it 20 frames to get to this next frame. And so linearly, it's going to be increasing during these 20 frames. And then in this one, I have it scaled to the 150, and then I have it linear 20 frames scaling back down to 100%. And I give this one frame so that it can loop back and start the process over in this loop. If I was to get rid of this one frame, it will instantly go back and you'll see what happens here. So you have to have that one frame. You have to have the where does it go kind of a frame. So if you think of it like that, the linear frame is going to go to here, but it needs to know what this is. And so what this is it's a one frame of 100%, if that made any sense. The other thing to note is that this scaling and stuff is dependent on the center. So if I was to change my center, which is this little red dot, if I was to change this center out to here, you'll see that it starts scaling in different directions. So just note that is based off of that. All right. And then one more thing to go over is that generally your bullet is going to be a center origin. There's going to be cases where it's not, but just generally you're going to have a centered origin. All right, so with those animation little things out of the way, let's go to our objects. All right, and in this tab I set up a bullet object. And if I show you the settings that I set it up with, you don't want to have it under the player group. that starts to run into some problems, especially when you're searching for player group only specific things. You want to have only your player controllable player in the player group. So you'll have to create another object group. I just named it player bullets, and I made sure that I allowed it to attack enemy group and I allowed it to attack the default tile wall. If you need to know how to make a group, you can go to settings, go to group management, and then here's where you can add another group. Now, when you do that, you have to make sure that you go back to your enemies if you're doing this with a already established project, and you're going to have to make sure that you add attack detections from the new group into your enemies. All right, and then when you're setting up your bullets, they're pretty simple for the most part. You're going to have some that have a certain AI to them. But for the most part, if it's a straightforward shoot and destroy, you're going to have like a seeking option or searching, whatever. You can have some particles showing with it. And then you're going to have a destroy. And when some of the links you're going to have there is you're going to have most likely a tile wall detection where all sides, if it hits a tile wall, or you could specify a tile wall group. Make sure you click this to specify. If you do not have this clicked, it just means any tile wall. So that's one. Another common one is going off the camera. You can do that. And if the bullet is looking like it destroys before it goes off the camera, you might need to give it some offset for it. And another one is when you make contact with collision detection. So the blue or purple detection of the enemy, when your attack hits it, boom, it will destroy. And you can set that to an enemy group, so all enemies, or you could do specific objects and go from there. And you'll notice that they're all ors because one can do it, or this one, or that one. And that would work. And then it destroys by using the runtime action destroy, which leads us to the next thing. And this is a very common thing. You're going to have where you shoot some bullets, you're going to leave a scene, and you're going to come back in. And then if you don't have the setting checked, you're going to see all your bullets appear again or redestroy or however you have it set up. So with bullets, you want to make sure you go to your basic settings and make sure that everything's set up correct. And the biggest one is this one. It's called Restore After Destruction. And by default, it is set to when scene is changed. And so you just want to make sure it's clicked on none if you never want to see that bullet again. And then of course you have all your other parameters. How much attack does this bullet do? And stuff like that. If it can be destroyed, maybe you could do some HP stuff. For the most part though, with a bullet, this is the big one. And then you can go over to moving settings. This is going to be the speed of your bullet. You're still going to want to set a horizontal speed. You're also going to want to auto adjust diagonal movement with bullets especially. I mean, there might be a case where you don't, and we'll get into this with the bullet settings, but if you don't have diagonal, you'll get more, say you're shooting a spread shot, you're going to have more of a flat look, where if you do auto adjust, you'll have more of a circular look because the bullets that are moving diagonal won't travel as fast. And you'll see, I'll show you an example of this as well. All right, and I think those are the big ones. There's going to be some more like your child relationship. You're going to have to do sometimes if you want a bullet to be a child and stuff like that. But for the most part, the restore condition and the speed and possibly the auto adjust are going to be your big ones to set. All right, and then with that said, let's go to the player and let's look at the fire bullet runtime. All right, so when I click add other runtime, I can go to page 1 and find fire bullet. And you'll see that there's only 2 options. So again, I really couldn't justify making a runtime video based off just this. Decided to combine all the settings and animation things. And so the first option is to select a bullet. Well, we have no bullets to select from because we haven't made any. And then the other one is to select the connection point. And this is where you could set up a connection point in your animations. Say you had a barrel of a gun and you put the connection point at the barrel, and then that bullet would shoot from that barrel, and that's one way you could do it. With the current player I have, I don't have any connection points, so that's why nothing's coming up. All right, now since we don't have a bullet, we have to make one. And you'll see that we don't have the bullet setting tab up here. Well, one way to pop it up is just by clicking OK on a blank bullet, and it will auto pop it up for you. Otherwise, you'll have to go to this cogwheel here. You have to click on it and then hit OK, and then the bullet setting will also pop up. All right, so this is how you can add a bullet. And by doing just clicking on this add here, you'll see that we now have bullet 001. And over here you can rename it. So we'll just call this the slash bullet. And then we can say to set the bullet object. So what object is going to be the bullet logic here? And that is our bullets. So now we can start diving into the bullet settings. And you'll see that there are 4 main parameters to set from. One is going to be your basic settings. So these are just all your basics. Then you'll have bullet shooting methods default motion, and those are all of these. And then you have your bullet shooting method changes. All right, and these are a lot more like AI following stuff. This default motion is a lot of your what way is the bullet going to be facing, or what's it going to be moving. And then you have lastly parameter is your bullet options. And you're just going to have a few things. You can change some gravity, or you could do some movement speed adjustments if you want. All right, so let's just take a look at the default layout, what you're going to get. So the first thing is this option, make bullet into a child object. That's not selected. So with that not being selected, that means that in your bullet, I'm in the bullet object right now, and under display and parent-child relation, that means that none of these parameters are going to be in effect. Okay, so if I was to click on make it into a child, then you would have to make sure that you adjusted these parameters the way that you want it. For instance, some of the big ones are stick to parent. If you have the bullet turn into a child object, it's going to just stay wherever it spawned because it's going to stick to the parent. Some other ones you might not want is you might not want the angle or the scale or object filters. So if it was a child and you didn't want any of these, you can just click them off just like that. All right, so let's go back to our bullet settings, and by default it's off, so we'll leave it off. Now let's go down to this one. This is the number of bullets in one shot. So when you hit A or whatever it is, you're going to get 1 bullet. That's it. And then we have the second one, interval between bullets. This is going to be the time frame in between your bullets that you're shooting in that one shot. So with 1 bullet, this doesn't mean anything. This doesn't even take effect. Now if you had 2 bullets, now this thing means something. This thing means that it's going to shoot 1 bullet, then it's going to wait a second, and then it's going to shoot the other bullet. So if you're going to want more a rapid shot, like a rapid burst shot, what usually 3, and then you're going to want them relatively quick, kind of like a 0.1. All right, so I'm going to change these back to 1 and 1, just to show the default setting real quick before we go into those examples. And then this last basic setting here is number of bullets allowed in the scene. So right now it's saying 1 bullet is allowed in the scene. And you do have this check mark, no limit, and this is pretty self-explanatory. It just means you could have unlimited numbers of these bullets on the scene. I'll just leave that unchecked. And let's go to the default setting of the default motion, and we'll see that by default it's set to don't set shooting method. All right, so it's just going to don't take any direction, nothing, just fire the bullet. And then the last thing that is set for default is the changes. It says don't set shooting method for changes. So there's nothing special about this bullet. We're literally just shooting 1 bullet, and we're only allowing 1 in the scene as we want. So now that the bullet's set up, we can now go to the action programs under the slash attack, and I must have added it under weight. Yep, so I'm going to get rid of it under weight, and I'm going to go to the slash attack. I'm going to click on fire bullet, and this time we can see that the slash bullet is now added. and we can click OK. And playtesting. We can see that as we press the button, the bullet fires. You'll see it didn't fire that second time though, and that's because it only allowed one bullet on the scene, and that other bullet was still on the scene when I was trying to fire that second one. All right, so now let's see what we can do. For instance, we talked about the number of bullets. We could have 3 shots, okay? And if I was to playtest this and shoot, you'll see that it still only shoots 1. So what is going on here? Because I have it set to fire 3 with an interval of 1 second. Now this might affect something right here, the number of bullets allowed in the scene. So instead of setting the number, I can just say no limit. So now let's playtest and see if anything changes. So now I can fire, and it still only fired the 1. So what's going on there? Well, what you have to realize is because this is such a long interval, you have to be waiting in that state that you're firing the bullet. And we can see in our animation player under attack that the total time it takes to run this animation is about 0.5 seconds. Right? So it doesn't even last long enough to call the second bullet. You can see in our objects under action programs that the way that it leaves is after the motion animation plays to the end. So what we have to do actually is we have to make sure that we have an after certain time passes, okay? If you want it to be this long. So now that I have after certain time passed to 3 seconds, I can click playtest and I can fire the bullet, and it's going to fire all 3 of them. Now, generally, you're not going to want that second in between. So you could do if motion plays to the end, and then you can just go to your bullet settings and you can just say a really short time. And then when you clicked playtest here, you can see that they fire pretty quick. Now, let's see here. If I face left and I fire them, they're still going down. And I wonder why that is, okay? And that will lead us to these other settings over here. So by default, the default motion was saying don't set. Now, right under it, we have an option to take over the direction of firing object. All right, so based off what the player is facing, we can take over that direction. So if we playtest this and I face left, you'll see that it is working as intended. And you'll also see that it's rotating correctly because of that auto rotate. So now let's keep going. We can click on these options. This one is shoot in specified direction, and then right underneath it is shoot in shooter objects display direction. So kind of the same thing that we had going on here, but let's just play test and verify that that is exactly what it does. And it is, it's shooting in the object's just direction. Now we can also shoot at the selected on-screen object groups. So in this case, we could say, hey, we want to shoot at the enemy group, and we can hit OK, and we can play test here. And no matter where I am, it's going to shoot at the enemy group. So that could be really useful, especially useful for tracking the mouse. If you had a mouse object, you can, as long as you have a specific group for it, you could be tracking that mouse object and shooting towards your mouse pointer. That's exactly how you would set something like that up. And then the next one is we can actually specify a direction for it to shoot. So if we said, hey, we want you to shoot at this 315 degrees, and if we were to play test here, no matter where we were, it would shoot at that. All right, so we're going to do the shoot in shooter objects display direction. And then we're going to move on to these cool settings here, the expand firing range and the set movement. And these two settings are going to add a lot of potential to your bullets. You're going to get some cool things like spread shots and specific boss encounters and stuff. So let's go to expand firing range first. This is set to 0, and what that means is it's going to go straight the direction that it is called from. And since we're calling it from the shooter object's display direction, it's only going to be going true left or true right, down or up. It's not going to vary any. And so we can actually add some angles to it. So let's just say that we add a 45-degree angle to it. And I'm just going to go here real quick, and if we shoot down, this is what's happening. If we shoot down, it's going to consider that shot more at a 45-degree angle. There we go. A 45-degree angle rather than just a 0 or straight down. All right. So this whole thing is going to be 45 degrees. And if we play test that, you'll see that that is the case. You can fire all 3 shots. And this is with an interval of 0. So if I was to do an interval of 0.1, and let's say I fired 5 shots, and I went attack, you'll see that it also varies the action depending on the next bullet incoming. So you can get some pretty cool effects with this. I'm just going to leave it at 0 and leave it at 5 for now. That's fine. All right, and so if you did a 180, then as you could imagine, it's going to be a 180, just like that, of firing range. So it's going to try to send them, and it depends on how many bullets you're firing. It'll try to send them through that whole 180. Okay, so you can see that it did the 180 right there. And it worked for up and left and right. Right, so that's how you can set up that firing. And let me add 0.5 to this, and let's just go 10 shots with this 180. Just want to show you. So you can see that it does like a spread upwards. So the angle starts from 0 and kind of works on to the outside. So you can get some really cool boss encounters, for instance, like that. And then just to get this on, let's do 360 and let's do 20. Not sure if it'll fire 20, but we'll see. And so let's hit it. Yeah, it didn't fire 20 because it's not delayed long enough. So I'll just say 0.1. There we go. That should work. And this should do a 360 degree, just like that. And you can see that it delayed it as it went up. All right. These bullets are dying because they're hitting the tile wall of this, just so you know. All right, so that is for fixed. Now let's see a wiper, for instance. And I'm going to put this back to, we'll leave it at that, that's fine. Now a wiper, let's just start with a 45-degree angle wiper. And if I was to hit play, you'll see that it does exactly that. It kind of wipes it up here. I'm going to give it 0.5 though, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to give it that weight. There we go. Just so that we can see the whole wiper play out. Okay, so you saw that it wipes, it starts shooting down, it wipes to the right, it wipes to the left, and then it ends back in the center. There you go. All right, and if we were to do that in a 360, and we hit playtest, we'll get kind of this big old wiper shot here. And it's not really showing well because I don't have enough bullets for it. So if I gave it 60, you can see that it does a full 360 before it goes, or even went over twice. All right. So I'm going to put this back to 45 to test out the next one, which is a random. All right. So your random is going to be just that. It's going to be shooting randomly. And I forgot I had that bullets pretty long there. So if we did a 360 of this, you can imagine it's going to be shooting randomly in all directions. All right. Now, one cool thing is with a wiper for instance, if you had a low, I think this will work. Yeah, I'll just try this out. If you had a low angle like this, you see that it went really slow. That's because we have a lot of bullets we're firing. So if we didn't have as many bullets, like say we only had 10, you'll see that it will complete the wiper a lot faster. Okay. All right. And so these are the main settings. I'm just going to put this back to fixed and 0. And that way we could see these changes a little better. All right. And before we start doing this, I'm going to change this back to 1. And the interval doesn't matter because we're only shooting one shot now. And the first one is to follow an object that's locked by the firing object. So if we were to click on it, this would do nothing. Even if we change some of these settings, it would do nothing until we lock the object. So what we have to add first is we have to add a lock object, and I'm going to set it to the enemy group just real quickly for setup. I have a video on this runtime action if you would like to see that. And I'm going to place it above because we want to lock before we fire. And if we click playtest, I don't even think I went over the setting, but actually let me change this back to if motion plays through. There we go. And let's go adjust the setting too. So if we had the tracking at 0, if just how it comes, 0, 0, even though we're locking on the object, we'll see that it just fires completely and just goes straight to the enemy. All right, and so now we can add some tracking to it. So we can say, hey, we want it to track just a little less. And if let's just try this number and see what happens. You'll see that it still goes straight to it. Okay, and that's because we haven't set a tracking time yet. So we need to set a time or else it's going to just go to that object. Now, if we set a tracking time of say 0.5, and we can also give a variation here of say, well, we'll just stick with 0.5, 0.5. And then we'll just say that it does a 50% tracking. So when we fire the bullet, 0.5 might be too long. Oops. 0.1, 0.1. That should be a little better. So you see that when I fire the bullet, it took that 0.1 second before it started to track. Now let's say that I was to take the tracking down to 0, 0.1 second, you can see that it didn't track it as well. Then in some cases it even missed it. So you can set how well it tracks with this. And if you have it up to 100%, it should shoot right at it every time. There you go. Now we can add some variation, as was said, and so this will mean that the bullet will be in this range before it starts. So we could see this really good when we add multiple shots. Let's do 3, and let's give them an interval of 0.1 each, like we did. And not every bullet now is going to track right away. Some will track sooner than others. And you can see that some are tracking really quick, some aren't. Sometimes they track at the same time. All right, so that's how we do that with firing for a locked object. The next one is very similar. You are auto-tracking objects on the screen and you're setting them by the object group. So once again, we could do the enemy group here. And it's the exact same thing as the lock object. I can remove the lock object. But I can just say, okay, the enemy group, we're going to have a 50%, a 0.1, and a 0.3 to a 0.3 variation. And if I was to do that again, you'll see that it does the exact same thing. Sometimes they go early, sometimes not, but they all track that enemy. Now, the reason you might notice real quick that some of them look like they're kind of getting stuck, that's just because the way I have it set up, the invincibility of the object is not allowing the attack detection to hit. So you would want something like an FOV, a field of vision, around this as well that could destroy one that are left hanging. All right, so yeah, you could So that's how you just auto track normal objects. And now you can do some another cool thing, which is called boomerang. All right, so here you have the time until it turns around. So 1 second is going to be too long, so I'm going to put it to 0.3, and we'll see how that looks. And we'll see that I can fire it down, and then they come back to me. And I'm going to do 1 for now, just to make it easier to see. And so we saw that after 0.3 it turned around. Well, we can also decelerate it before it turns around, so it can give us like that boomerang look. And you'll notice that it also auto turns it around. So when you do decelerate, you have to increase the time a little bit because it's just not enough. So if we went 0.6, you can see that it decelerates, and then comes back. It's pretty cool. You would want it to where there's probably an FOV around the player, and when the boomerang comes back, it destroys. So you'd have to have like a wait. That way you know it's out of range, and then when it goes back in range, boom, it would destroy. And that way your player could be looking like it catches it. And the reason I brought that up also is because now there's an option for tracking. So if you were tracking, let's just say even a 50% or whatever, you can play test, and you'll see that as I shoot it and go, it just tracks me. So if I don't have a way to say, hey, I'm close to the player, because remember the conditions for this bullet, it's if it hits an enemy like that, if it goes off screen, which I can't really do as the player, or if it hits a tile wall. So you'd have to have a way for it to destroy as a boomerang if you wanted it to track more slowly like that. All right, that looks cool. That could be like a fire effect. No. All right, and then the last thing that we can do is have it turn around based off a wall or collision detection. So if we were to do this, we could see that, boom, well, since our logic is to destroy the bullet on collision detection, it won't work. But if we did it on a tile wall, you'll see that it reflect early than it was supposed to. All right. And that's really it for these. If I was to just put it back on don't set a shooting method, we can just real quickly go through displaying the speed. If we just said, hey, we want it to go really fast, we can change the speed to 200%, and it's going to adjust the bullet's horizontal vertical movement by 200%. And we could also give it some gravity, and that was if we had on like a side view project, you could set it gravity. And by doing this, 100% would be full gravity, so meaning that there is still gravity, and then you would just go lower based off, so this would only be 20% gravity, that would be 60% gravity, and so on and so on. And so yeah, if we traveled at 200%, we could see that we could get a quick traveling bullet. All right, and that is it for the bullet settings. So there's one more thing I want to go over. It's a pretty cool feature. If we go to our action programs, go to our bullet, and we click add a runtime, and we click template move setting, and leave it on the bound, which should actually be called bounce, I feel, and click OK. And then we also have to go to the link, and let's just remove the tile wall detection here. And let's also remove going off the camera. Okay. So now the only way is if it's collision with another object. So with this bound move template setting, this is kind of a cool effect that we can get. If we fire at a tile wall, it's now going to bounce off the tile walls because that's what we set it to do. And so you could have these cool little maybe puzzles or something just by having a bullet that is bound back and forth. All right, so I hope this video helped you out. Again, we went over the animations, some object setting up tips. We went through every one of the bullet setting options there and the bullet runtime command. If you got any cool methods for using bullets in your projects, please feel free to comment down below. With that, I'll see you at the next video.